All right, thank you. Great. Since we're at the end of the session, I'll just quickly run through the slides. So, I was asked to talk about, why should MSMEs consider renewable energy, and what are the problems or barriers they encounter, and also probably a little bit on solutions on how to overcome those barriers, right? Um, okay, let's see. So I think if you were to ask me this question like about 3, 4 years back, why should MSMEs consider renewable energy? Uh, I mean, of course, we talk about sustainability, environment, it will be helpful, localized emissions are, fewer, etc., etc. But we would also used to talk about, how in the long term renewable energy was really cost effective, and the payback used to happen in probably 7 years or something like that. But right now, I think the really direct reason, and which doesn't need a lot of explanation, is that it is cheap. It is simply cheaper right now for companies to use renewable electricity, uh, because over the years, economies of scale and technology improvements and market maturity has brought the cost down. Of course, not to mention the supporting government policies. On your screen, you can see how the benchmark, I mean, you could say these are the average wind and solar power costs compared with the LT commercial, LT industrial, HT commercial, and HT industrial tariffs in some key states of India. And it's there for everyone to see. It is simply cheaper to use renewable energy. Then for MSMEs, right, particularly when we zoom into MSMEs, why specifically MSMEs should be thinking about it? Of course, it is cheaper, but more importantly, it is, especially if we are talking about solar PV. And there's a reason why I'm only talking about solar PV, because there are other forms of renewable energy. There are windmills, small hydro, etc., etc. But as you can imagine, these are all highly locational specific. The small wind turbine market isn't very mature yet. So if you want to generate electricity on your factory premises, on your business premises, pretty much solar PV is your only option as of things stand today. And it is a modular technology. So, I mean, if you have space, you can generate any amount of electricity. It just you add more panels, right? And again, it is on site. It is relatively easy to maintain, and it is also more predictable and easier to store, because I mean, by and large, you know that there's going to be X hours of sunshine in a day. And even if you have to plan for a battery backup, you know that the generation is going to happen at certain parts of the day, pretty much throughout the year. We're accounting for some seasonal changes. But for wind, which one, it cannot be on site, especially we don't have a matured mini wind turbine market yet. But two, also, it could be highly seasonal. Again, that post monsoon time is when you have about 60% of wind power generation happens in 2 to 3 months. So planning for battery capacities could be slightly tricky. So all of these things make solar PV ideal for micro, small, and medium enterprises, especially so for the micro and smaller ones, because some of the medium scale ones are also slightly large actually, and they can afford other options. Having said this, why aren't already MSMEs? I told you guys it is cheaper, it's easier to use, everything. Having said this, why aren't MSMEs already, using solar PV? We do talk, in the market when we go and talk to MSMEs, we do realize that they have low awareness. Not so much in terms of prices. I think prices of late people are more or less well versed, but what kind of panels to use, which vendor to go with, which brand to go with, these are all still some of the challenges Like if you're buying a mobile phone, you could pretty much go onto Flipkart or Amazon, and you have all these thousands of options listed, lots of reviews. It's fairly easy for you to pick up. Unfortunately, that kind of market maturity didn't come up yet for solar PV, but it's going to get there. Some most of the MSMEs again could be operating out of leased premises, so they always have this concern with what if I install rooftop solar PV here, and 3 years down the line my lease expires for this land, I have to move out of this premises, or sometimes I don't know whether my business will be running. For example, I mean the most pertinent example is right now during Corona, nobody expected that businesses will be intact for such a long time. So what to do with this kind of variability. If I make an investment, is it going to last long, or is it going to be a dead weight? Will it be a sunken cost, etc. These are some problems. And even though central and state governments have pushed for net metering and gross metering programs and subsidy schemes, uh, we find, I think, increasingly net metering is being removed for industrial consumers. And gross metering tariffs. Gross metering is where government says, okay, if you put up a rooftop solar plant and inject electricity into the grid, I'll pay you X rupees per unit. But that tariff isn't attractive yet, especially for MSMEs. They would much rather be interested in generating power and using it themselves. And the subsidy schemes also have had limited success in the Indian market, because again the amount of subsidy that comes either from state or center is limited, and usually they're offered on first come first served basis, and even that the vendors have to avail that subsidy after giving the product to the consumer. So it's a long run process. It didn't really prove to be effective. So there are no tailor-made products for MSMEs that way. And we all understand that MSMEs, they don't have highly reliable cash flows. Their business can be variable. So even if you're asked to, why not you don't invest in the rooftop solar plant, a vendor will come and install it on your premises, and you can pay them per unit of electricity, pretty much like you will pay to your local, discom. The challenge is the vendor themselves will not be comfortable, because they'll say, I don't know if this MSME is going to be in business 2 years down the line, and the payback period is, even if I consider 5 years, how am I sure that this contract is going to be honored? So that kind of credit worthiness of the MSMEs is a bit of a constraint. And again, often because of their size and their financial capabilities, some of the MSMEs cannot directly invest into their own rooftop solar plant. So these are some of the barriers that they have. Right. So having said, that these are the barriers, then what is it that we are trying to do? What could be happening, to cross these barriers? In the previous MSME series, some of you would have noticed that my colleague, Ms. Kajol, had talked about how they've been going around industrial parks trying to aggregate demand. Essentially telling that, a bunch of MSMEs, if there are small factories, 4 or 5 factories, we tell them that instead of all four of you going and buying solar power from different vendors, why not you just come together and buy from a single vendor? So that way you can bargain for better prices, the cost will come down, and you can also afford to hire the services of a consultant who can help you with the techno commercial evaluation of the product. That was something we were doing. And I this is, I mean, why we have gone the demand aggregation route is, I've just told you, explained with the genesis of that kind of work, that the MSMEs have these limitations. They cannot invest on their own a great deal. They cannot access these rooftop solar PPAs because of credit worthiness. So their strength can come in terms of numbers, especially when they can aggregate their demand. And on your screen, you'll see that there are, three models of demand aggregation that we propose, through which MSMEs can access renewable energy, cheaper, affordable renewable energy. One is through geographical aggregation on your right side, which is where we encourage MSMEs in a cluster or a special economic zone to do what we have done in Aurangabad and Naroda, like Rajul would have explained in last session. But if you are part of a supply chain to a large textile company, to a large fashion company, like my previous colleague was talking about, and you could oftentimes the fashion brands, global brands have sustainability commitments, which they try to work with you in, making your electricity supply also green. So there you could also try to tap into the financial expertise of this fashion brand or into their CSR money to see if they can help with some of these rooftop solar projects. These needn't be directly, subsidies that these corporates will give to you, but there could be technical assistance grants where they hire the consultants to help all the bunch of companies to buy rooftop solar. It could also be risk guarantee mechanisms where they'll say, okay, if you bunch of companies want to buy electricity on per unit basis from a vendor, I will guarantee this transaction by putting in X amount of money into a revolving fund. And the other kind of aggregation that is probably sectoral aggregation, where you all could be, electrochemical plating units. I've just taken that example opportunistically also because, this electroplating industries, they actually need the direct current as opposed to the alternate current that we all have supply hooked up to. So there, because solar PV panels generate direct current. Uh, right now, what we typically do is, we also invest in an inverter which will convert that into alternate current and then you use it. So there are costs for the inverter. There are also losses in terms of conversion to AC power. But in electroplating, if you're using direct current, you can avoid the cost of the inverter and also the conversion losses. So it works for that kind of industry, right? So electroplating units as a whole, if there are a bunch of them situated in a cluster, they could be looking at something very tailor-made for them. Like that, different industries which have specific requirements, they could the MSMEs in the industry could come together and work with state, central government agencies for better policies or financial products. Mm, I think that's more or less it. I've actually explained how technical MSME assistance to MSMEs can help in geographical aggregation. In the screen, you can see the solar potential of various industrial parks in India, and right, the same thing. And this is the revolving fund mechanism that I was talking about, where a brand can guarantee a transaction of the MSMEs. And also electroplating clusters, how, or you could be talking food processing units where instead of electricity, you actually probably will be better off with solar dryers. That's also another example. So yeah, that's it from my side.